My father treated our house like a military barracks, punishing every mistake no matter how small. And when the day of his retirement came, he demanded our presence with the same rigidity as always, and we followed his own rules to the letter. He spent 26 years in the Army, constantly reminding everyone that he was a sergeant and preaching that discipline was the foundation of everything, that children needed limits to become someone in life, which for me and my two younger brothers resulted in a childhood that felt more like military training than a real home. Every day we were forced to wake up at 5:30 a.m., even on weekends, and our father conducted a meticulous inspection of our bedrooms before breakfast. If the bed wasn't perfect, hospital corners tight, he would rip everything apart and order us to redo it. And if there was even a single pencil out of place on our desks, he'd knock everything onto the floor and make us organize it again. Crying was forbidden. Crying is weakness, and weakness has no place here, he used to say. My brother Leo cried only once at 7 years old, after falling off his bike and tearing his knee down to the bone. And our father punished him by making him stand at attention in the yard for an hour because a soldier doesn't cry over a simple injury. And even after Leo needed 4 stitches at the hospital, our father said it was just drama. Household chores were divided under a rigid system posted on the fridge, and if you messed up, you lost privileges. Watching TV was a privilege, dessert was a privilege, talking on the phone or playing outside all depended on his approval and could be taken away at any time for any reason. My mother left when I was 11, saying she couldn't stand living like a prisoner anymore. My father said she was weak and that we were better off without her, repeating that a real family didn't need people who couldn't handle discipline, and he ordered us to forget her since she had already forgotten us. I didn't see my mother again until I was 19, when I tracked her down myself. She cried when she saw me and said leaving us was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but that staying would have destroyed her, and I believed her. School was another battlefield. Anything below an A was unacceptable. When Danny got AB+ in algebra at 12, our father made him copy the entire chapter of the textbook by hand 5 times over the weekend, missing his best friend's birthday because he was sitting there on Saturday night copying equations. While our father said birthdays were distractions and Danny should be grateful for being kept focused. There was no room to disagree with him, question an order, or refuse a request. Talking back meant push-ups. Arguing turned into running laps around the block, and disobedience cost you dinner. Once, I went 3 nights without eating because I refused to join the school's junior military program, and my father said I was ungrateful and that he only wanted to give me a future. I joined the program and hated every minute of it. When we turned 18, we each went our own way. I went to college on the other side of the country, Leo joined the merchant navy to escape land altogether, and Danny became a guitar teacher in Portland, which my father called a waste of talent. We almost never went back home, and when we did, he only criticized. My apartment was messy, Leo's beard was unprofessional, Danny's career was an embarrassment, and nothing was ever enough. Last year, my father announced he would be receiving a special honor at his old base, 30 years of service counting his reserve time, and there would be a ceremony full of former commanders and veterans, and he wanted us there in formal clothes. He sent an email with the date, time, and a list of rules about our behavior. I want you there 15 minutes early. Don't speak unless someone speaks to you first. Call me Sergeant in front of my colleagues. This is my moment. Show respect. I called my brothers that night and asked what they were going to do. Leo said he wasn't going. Danny said the same. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. I realized I didn't want to go either. I had spent my entire life obeying my father, always afraid of what would happen if I didn't do what he ordered. But I was 32 years old, had my own apartment, a job, a life, and he could no longer force me to run or take away my dinner. He had no power over me anymore unless I let him. I sent my father an email a week before the ceremony saying I wouldn't attend. Leo sent his the next day, Danny the day after that, and none of us explained anything. Because our father always said excuses were for people without commitment, that either you show up or you don't. 3 days before the ceremony, I sat in my apartment refreshing my inbox minute after minute with no response, my hands trembling on the mouse as I imagined him reading our messages with that hard expression he used whenever someone broke a rule. And I had to keep repeating to myself that I was 32, lived in another state, paid my own bills, made my own decisions, and he couldn't force me to do anything anymore. I refreshed my email again and again. Nothing. Stood up, got a glass of water, sat back down, refreshed again, checked the clock. Almost midnight, knowing that in 3 days he'd be standing there expecting us to arrive 15 minutes early, watching the entrance, checking his watch, and realizing that none of us would be there. I refreshed my email one last time before forcing myself to close the laptop. And on the day of the ceremony, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm. 20 years of waking up at that hour had trained my brain, and I lay there staring at the ceiling with nowhere to go, no bed to make with perfect corners, no inspection to face. I grabbed my phone and opened the group chat with my brothers to see if anyone else was awake. Sent a message, and within 30 seconds Leo replied saying he was already up. Then Danny replied saying he had barely slept, that he kept expecting our father to knock on the door, even though he knew it was impossible, since he was on the other side of the country. He said he was staying alert, hoping to hear footsteps in the hallway. I told both of them that we had made the right decision. Leo only sent a thumbs up, and Danny didn't reply anymore. I got out of bed, made some coffee, and sat in the kitchen, drinking it slowly. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m., so at that moment it was already happening, just in another time zone. I imagined my father standing there, wearing his dress uniform, being greeted by former superiors and veterans, everyone saluting, while the 3 empty chairs, ours, drew everyone's attention. I poured myself more coffee, and the phone remained silent. Noon arrived, and the ceremony must have already ended. I knew that because the schedule was in the email my father had sent. Opening at 10, tribute at 10:30, reception at 11:15. It was already past that, Everything finished, and the phone hadn't made a sound all day. No calls, no messages, no voicemail. The silence almost felt worse than the furious lecture I had been expecting, yet every few minutes I picked up the phone to check if I had missed a notification, but the screen stayed empty. Only at 6 p.m. did the phone ring. It was Leo, and I answered immediately. He asked if I had heard anything from our father. I said no, and he said he hadn't either. We talked for almost 2 hours, always coming back to the same question. We had really done it. We had said no to our father, refused an order, and nothing happened. The world kept going. We were still alive, with our jobs, apartments, our lives. Leo's voice sounded different, lighter, as if he could finally breathe, and I said I understood exactly what he meant. We talked until my battery was almost dead. He said he would call Danny the next day to see how he was doing, and I agreed. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about everything. 2 days later, while having breakfast, my phone vibrated with a voicemail notification. I hadn't even heard it ring. It was a message left at 6 in the morning, while I was still asleep, from my father. I listened to his voice on speaker, tense and controlled, the way he sounded when he was angry and trying not to show it. He said he was disappointed but not surprised, that we had become people who give up easily and don't even honor basic agreements, that he would remember this when we needed something from him, that we had embarrassed him in front of colleagues and veterans, that we had shown everyone who we really were. The message ended. I listened again, paying attention to every word, and then once more, 90 seconds just to say we were a failure. I deleted the message, went into the trash, and deleted it for good because I didn't want to risk hearing it again. After that, working became difficult. I sat in front of the computer with the spreadsheet open and couldn't type anything, stuck on the same cell for an hour. My coworker Jasper walked by, looked, came back, and asked if I was okay. I said yes, but he could tell I wasn't. He pulled up a chair, sat down, and said I had been staring at that cell for 20 minutes. I closed the spreadsheet and gave him a rough version of what had happened, my father's military background, the ceremony, the 3 emails refusing the invitation. Jasper listened in silence and, at the end, asked just one thing. Why did I feel guilty for not going to an event where I would be treated as a subordinate, not as a son? I didn't know how to answer. He said his father was controlling too, in a different way, and that it took him a long time to realize that this guilt was old and deeply rooted. He said feeling guilty doesn't mean you did something wrong. Then he got up and went back to his desk, and I stayed another 10 minutes staring at the spreadsheet before actually starting to work. A week after the ceremony, late at night, the phone rang again. Danny. I answered and heard him crying on the other end. At first he could barely speak. He said our father had shown up at his apartment an hour earlier, stayed outside for about 20 minutes demanding to talk, banging on the door, calling his name nonstop, telling him to stop being a coward and open the door, but Danny didn't open it. He stayed on the other side with his hand on the door, listening as our father's voice got louder, until eventually our father left, and Danny watched through the peephole until he saw him get into the car and drive away for good. Now he was afraid our father would come back and asked what he should do. I told him to call the police if our father returned, that he had no obligation to open the door for anyone, and that our father had no right to show up like that without warning. Danny said he knew all that, but still felt like he had done something wrong by not opening the door. I stayed on the phone with him for over an hour until he calmed down and tried to sleep. After we hung up, I stayed awake, thinking about our father driving all the way to Portland just to stand outside Danny's apartment yelling. My anxiety started to interfere with my sleep. I began waking up several times a night to check my phone. Work suffered. I started making mistakes, forgot a meeting with my supervisor, emailed the wrong client, couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. I decided to look for therapists in the area and found one named Layla Knowles, well-reviewed and with available appointments. I called and scheduled a session for the following week. In the first session, I felt a bit lost, sitting across from her without knowing how to begin. She asked me to explain why I was there, and I talked about the ceremony in my childhood, describing the room inspections, the chores, the punishments, and how my father ran the house like a military barracks. Layla listened carefully, taking notes as I spoke, and when I finished she asked whether I had ever described my childhood as abusive. I said no, that I had always called it strict, old-fashioned, or just said it was my father's way. She wrote something in her notebook and said we would come back to that in future sessions, and when the appointment ended I scheduled another before leave. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Leo's ship docked and he had some time off, and he called me from a hotel near the port, saying he was thinking about getting a job on land. He said that before, being at sea felt like freedom, but now it just felt like running away, and he admitted he was tired of running and asked whether I thought we had made the right choice by refusing the ceremony. I told him that more than the right choice, it was the only one we could bear, and asked what kind of work he was considering on land. He said he had some contacts at a maritime transport company in Seattle that were looking for someone with his experience to handle logistics, which would mean settling in one place without constant travel, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for that yet. I said he didn't have to decide right away and that he had 2 weeks off to think about it, and we talked about Danny in the episode of our father showing up at his apartment. Leo went quiet, then said he was afraid our father might show up at the hotel where he was staying. I told him our father didn't even know where he was staying, and Leo agreed, but said he still felt nervous. We talked for another hour until his phone died. In the third session with Layla, she asked me what I thought I had lost by not going to the ceremony. I started to answer that nothing, that I hadn't lost anything because my relationship with my father had been broken for a long time. But suddenly something shifted inside me. My eyes began to burn, and I realized that what I had lost was the fantasy that one day my father would be proud of me. I had lost the hope that if I did everything right, achieved enough, or proved my worth somehow, he would finally see me as good enough. The truth was that our real relationship had ended years ago. My father had spent his life criticizing, controlling, and being impossible to please, yet I clung to the idea that I could still change something, that there was a version of him capable of loving me the way I needed, but that father never existed. By then I was crying, and Layla handed me a box of tissues and said it was okay to grieve the father I should have had while still accepting the real father I did have, and that those two things didn't cancel each other out. By the end of the session, I had used half the box. 3 days later, my mother sent me an email with the subject, "Just to see how you're doing," saying she had heard about the ceremony situation through an acquaintance, without saying who, and that she wanted me to know a bit about my father's past. My grandfather had been a career military man and treated my father exactly the way my father treated us, with a childhood full of inspections, punishments, and impossible demands. She said my father joined the army at 18 to escape his own father, but ended up becoming just like him. And she made a point of saying that understanding the pattern didn't excuse what my father did, nor was she asking me to forgive him. She just thought it was important for me to know where it all came from. I read the email 3 times, imagining my father as a child, standing at attention in the yard, being scolded for crying or making mistakes, which explained a lot, but didn't change how I felt. And I replied only thanking her for the message because I truly didn't know what else to say. On Monday, when I arrived at work, my supervisor told me I would be responsible for training the new hire, Jessica, who was already by my desk with her notebook open and a nervous look on her face. I showed her how the database system worked, and on her first attempt I saw her enter a client code in the wrong field, the number ending up in the wrong place, and I felt my jaw tighten. I opened my mouth to call her out and say that kind of mistake was unacceptable, but the words came out sounding exactly like my father's, and I stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me, startled. I took a deep breath and said it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes when they're learning something new, showed her how to fix it, and explained it again. She thanked me, and I felt strange for being kind because it wasn't my instinct. I had to fight the urge to correct her in a harsh way, and that morning I caught myself at least 3 times almost losing my patience with her over nothing. Each time, I took a deep breath and chose to speak differently. It felt strange, like I was being too soft, but I knew that harsh voice wasn't mine, it was his. The group chat with Leo and Danny had been active since the ceremony, with us talking every day, sending memes, and chatting about everything except our father, until Danny stopped replying. With no sign of him for 3 days, Leo noticed and asked if everything was okay, and I sent a direct message too. Only on the 4th day did Danny reappear in the group, saying that maybe we should reach out to our father to try to fix things, that it felt wrong to leave everything like that, since family was important, and Leo replied immediately, saying that Danny was giving in and that we had agreed to stick together in this. That if he went after our father, it would make the rest of us look worse. Danny shot back saying he wasn't giving in, he just didn't want to spend his entire life avoiding our father. Leo got angry and said we were supporting each other to heal from this, not to reinforce trauma, and I just kept reading the exchange as a knot tightened in my stomach. Danny said that maybe real support meant allowing each person to do what they thought was best, even trying again with our father, and Leo replied that this was nonsense and that Danny was just afraid of being the bad son. The argument dragged on for over an hour, and in the end I wrote that each of us needed to do what we could live with and believed was right, and that there was no wrong answer here. After that, no one replied, and the group stayed silent for 2 days. 6 weeks after the ceremony, I came home from work and found a letter in my mailbox from my father, my hands shaking as I opened the envelope right there in the building lobby, and inside there was only a newspaper clipping with no note at all, an article about the retirement ceremony with a photo of my father in uniform shaking hands with his former commander, the headline talking about 30 years of dedicated service and tributes. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to guess what my father wanted me to feel, whether he wanted me to feel guilty for not going, to show me what I had missed, or to prove that the ceremony happened just fine without us, and that he was okay. But I couldn't understand it. There was no written message, just the article and the photo, and I took it up to my apartment and left it on the kitchen counter, looking at it 5 more times that night, trying to decode its meaning. Because my father never did anything without a reason and every action was a lesson or a message. Yet this time it felt different, as if he didn't know what to say and sent the clipping as proof that the event had happened. I messaged Leo and Danny to tell them about it. Leo said it was meant to make us feel bad. Danny thought maybe our father just wanted us to see it, and I said I had no idea what it was supposed to mean. My next therapy session with Layla was 3 days later, and I brought the clipping with me and showed it to her. She looked at it and asked what I thought it meant, and I said I'd been trying to figure that out since it arrived. She asked how my father usually expressed emotions, and I explained that he didn't show any. He gave orders, criticized, and went silent when he was angry. So Layla nodded and said that made sense, explaining that some people, especially those with a military background, learn to suppress emotional expression because vulnerability is seen as weakness. She said that everything my father feels probably comes out in distorted ways like control, criticism, or silence, because he never learned how to communicate feelings in a healthy way, and suggested that maybe the clipping was the only way he knew to show that he wished we had been there, or maybe it was a twisted way of saying he was hurt, or maybe he truly didn't know what to say and sent the article instead of words. She asked whether I could feel compassion for my father's pain while still keeping boundaries to protect myself, and I said those two things felt contradictory. She replied that they weren't at all, explaining that I could understand how his childhood shaped him and feel sad about that, while still refusing to be mistreated, because compassion doesn't mean accepting everything and setting boundaries isn't the same as hating someone. I thought about that for a while. It felt true, but also very hard. Over the next 3 days, I tried to write an email to my father, making 7 different versions and deleting them all, until I finally sent a short message saying I wasn't willing to maintain a relationship in which I was treated like a subordinate rather than a son, that I understood his past and why he raised us the way he did, but that it didn't make it acceptable, and that if he wanted to build a different kind of relationship I was open to it, but only if he treated me as an equal and respected my choices even when he disagreed. I read the email to Layla in the following session, and she said it was clear, honest, and fair, then asked what I expected in response. I said he would probably get angry, call me disrespectful, or not reply at all, and when she asked if I was prepared for that, I said yes. I sent the email that night at 10:15 p.m. and barely slept, and my father's reply arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning while I was still in bed. The email was blunt, saying I was being disrespectful and making excuses for my weakness, that a real man doesn't need therapy to fulfill his duties, that I was trying to blame him for my failures even though he had done everything to raise me properly, and that if I wanted to throw the family away over nothing, that was my choice, but I shouldn't expect an apology for him having taught me discipline. I read it twice sitting on the bed, feeling sad but not surprised. Part of me had still hoped he might say something different, acknowledge even a little that things had been hard, but he didn't, and instead shut down even more, just as I had expected. I realized that even while saying I didn't expect change, I still had hope, and that hurt more than the email itself. 3 months after the ceremony, Leo called me with news, saying he had gotten a job at a shipping company in Seattle and would keep working on ships, but with shorter routes so he could spend more time at home. He mentioned that being on the same coast as Danny was important to him, and when I asked if they had been talking more, he said they had met twice in the past month and that it was helping. He explained that Danny was trying to understand his relationship with our father and that Leo wanted to support him, even though it wasn't easy, and admitted that those meetings were helping him start to see himself outside our father's shadow and outside that constant pattern of running away, saying he had spent 15 years at sea escaping from everything and that maybe it was time to face things head on. I told him I was proud of him. He laughed and said it was strange to hear that, and I repeated it, and we talked for another hour about the new job, what Seattle was like, and whether he was finally going to buy furniture for his apartment or keep living as if he might move at any moment. One Thursday afternoon, my boss called me into her office and told me the company was going through a restructuring and that I had been promoted to team lead, with a small raise and responsibility for managing 4 people, and I accepted immediately. On my first day in the new role, I gathered the team and said I wanted to create a welcoming environment where everyone could ask questions, make mistakes, and learn. And one of the team members, Olivia, who had been there for 12 years, came to my desk at the end of the day and said, "You're the best manager I've ever had." And for the first time in months, I felt genuinely proud of myself, realizing I was breaking the cycle and choosing to be different from my father, and that it mattered. 4 months after I sent the email to my father, he wrote again, briefly, saying he was selling the family house and moving to a smaller place, and that if we wanted to take anything from our childhood bedrooms we had until the end of the month, otherwise he would donate or throw everything away. I called Leo right away, and he said he had received the same email, and when I asked if he wanted to go, he said he would only go if I went too. And Danny said the exact same thing, so we agreed on a day to go together, make it quick, and decided that none of us would be alone with our father at any point. Leo said he would pick Danny up in Portland and the two of them would meet me directly at the house, and I said I would arrive earlier and keep our father occupied until they got there. We went on a Saturday. I arrived at 9 in the morning and he was already outside loading boxes into his truck. He just nodded without saying anything, and I went straight in, up to my old bedroom, which looked exactly the same. The bed made with tightly tucked corners, the desk empty and clean, and I opened the closet, found some old books and a box of high school photos, and put them into a bag quickly. Leo and Danny arrived about 20 minutes later. Each went straight to their own rooms, and we barely exchanged words with our father, who stayed downstairs or outside most of the time. We took only what mattered to us and loaded it into our cars, and when we were about to leave, our father appeared in the garage, looked at the 3 of us standing by the cars, and said, the house was already empty enough, his voice cold and emotionless. For a moment, I saw him as a lonely old man who had pushed away everyone who cared about him, which made me a little sad but didn't make me want to stay. We said goodbye and left, and no one looked back. On the drive, I kept thinking about what Leo had said on the phone about seeing each other more often, not only when something bad happened, and planning a real get-together felt strange after so long avoiding anything that resembled a family obligation. Danny was the one who brought it up in our group chat, saying we needed to choose a date and take it seriously instead of always saying someday. And Leo suggested meeting twice a year, so it wouldn't feel like an obligation, but also wouldn't be too rare. We picked dates 6 months apart, and I put them on my calendar immediately before I had time to back out. Our first official trip was in March, at a cabin in the mountains between Seattle and Portland, where I drove up on Friday afternoon. Leo was already there putting groceries away in the kitchen, and Danny arrived an hour later with his guitar and a case of beer. That first night, we just sat on the porch talking about work, apartments, and everyday things, without touching on our father, the ceremony, or anything heavy that usually crept in. The next day, we hiked to a lake, and Leo talked about his new job, saying it felt strange to sleep in the same bed every night instead of spending weeks at sea. And Danny talked about a student who was learning faster than anyone he had ever taught, and how proud he felt watching her progress. And I realized then that we weren't just surviving together anymore. We were building something, and that being there was our choice. On Sunday morning, before packing up to leave, we sat around the cabin table and promised to make it a real tradition, no matter where each of us lived or what was going on in our lives, that we would meet twice a year. 7 months after the ceremony, I woke up on a Saturday and realized that I was okay. Not perfect, but genuinely okay. I was seeing Layla every 2 weeks, and the sessions were helping me understand that I could choose different paths from the ones my father had shown me. Work was going well, My team seemed to enjoy working with me. I talked to Leo and Danny often, and our conversations were light and healthy, not just venting about old trauma. With my father, we exchanged emails maybe once a month about practical things like his new address or whether I needed anything from storage. The messages were always short and objective. He never apologized, and I no longer expected him to. And while it wasn't the relationship I dreamed of as a child, it was the only honest relationship we could have.
This is the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, hype up the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next shocking stories here on the channel. Bye-bye!